Betrayal rarely strikes like a sudden thunderbolt. Instead, it creeps in quietly through the smallest fissures. It begins with whispered secrets, unread notifications, vague excuses, and brief, unmentioned encounters. While one partner revels in a cheap illusion of freedom, the other grows increasingly uneasy, desperately hunting for proof as suspicion metastasizes into an all-consuming obsession. This is the harrowing reality of how infidelity triggered an irreversible descent into madness, where toxic jealousy warped into a desire for total destruction and love was weaponized into relentless manipulation. What started as a garden-variety affair culminated in a nightmare that no one could have anticipated. In September 2023, a quiet suburban home was transformed into the backdrop for one of the most shocking and unpredictable tragedies in recent memory. When first responders arrived at the bloody scene, they had no inkling that they were stepping into far more than a typical crime of passion. They had stumbled into a meticulously orchestrated psychological game where every single player was merely a pawn on an unseen chessboard. At the heart of this storm was Nathaniel Ruiz Jr., born around 1993, in one of Chicago's most notorious and unforgiving neighborhoods. With his exact birth date lost to the fog of an unstable upbringing, his early years were defined by relentless chaos, where ambient aggression and criminal enterprise were simply facts of daily life. From a young age, Nathaniel exhibited a volatile, uncontrollable temper. His school years were a blur of violent brawls, defiance toward authority, and a complete disregard for academics. His first brush with the law came during his teenage years, after participating in a street robbery, but his juvenile status spared him from meaningful punishment. That early leniency only taught him a dangerous lesson. The criminal underworld offered easy money and a thrill he couldn't resist. As the years rolled on, his rap sheet grew darker and more violent. In 2016, he was slapped with assault charges, followed shortly by a DUI arrest the very next year. Yet, Nathaniel's true obsession was never just breaking the law. It was firearms. He obsessively collected an extensive arsenal, proudly parading handguns, assault rifles, and boxes of ammunition across his social media feeds. This brazen display eventually drew the ire of local law enforcement, leading to a strict court order that legally banned him from possessing weapons. Naturally, Nathaniel treated the ban with absolute contempt, continuing to buy firearms illegally on the black market. In a bizarre twist of defiance, he even launched his own private security firm. The entire operation was completely bogus. He possessed no state licenses, no legal permit to carry, and a criminal record that rendered the venture entirely illegal. Unfazed, he aggressively marketed his firm online, posing in heavy body armor while flexing illegal weapons to project an aura of dangerous authority. Enter Linda Palomo. Born on February 3, 1973, Linda was a fierce, self-made woman by the time her path crossed with Nathaniel's. A devoted mother of 5 and a proud grandmother, she had built a life on her own terms, standing in stark contrast to Nathaniel's chaotic world. Though she had grown up in a stable home, her romantic past was littered with heartbreak. After a young marriage crumbled, she was left to navigate the relentless grind of single parenthood, working multiple jobs to keep a roof over her children's heads while helping raise the next generation. Despite her battle-hardened exterior, she still quietly yearned for genuine affection and romantic fulfillment. Known for her iron, formidable personality, Linda demanded respect and maintained absolute control over her inner circle, refusing to tolerate even a hint of disloyalty. She expected unwavering loyalty from those closest to her, making her bond with Nathaniel Ruiz Jr. all the more baffling to everyone around them. When Nathaniel entered her life, no one could quite comprehend what brought them together. He was 20 years her junior, carried the heavy baggage of a troubled past, and possessed a notoriously volatile temperament. Yet, their relationship escalated rapidly after a chance encounter, supposedly facilitated by mutual acquaintances. At first, Linda didn't take him seriously, but his raw confidence, persistent pursuit, and dangerous charisma gradually wore down her defenses. For Nathaniel, Linda was an anchor of stability, offering him shelter, resources, and emotional support. For Linda, the dynamic offered a novel thrill. She felt completely in control, believing she could mold and direct this younger man's chaotic life. They were two wildly different individuals, held together by the very contrast of their personalities. Before long, they moved in together, and soon Linda's children and grandchildren were all living under the same roof. The house quickly grew overcrowded, but it was far from a warm, loving home. A suffocating atmosphere began to build, and neighbors soon noticed that the couple's dynamic was anything but harmonious. Nathaniel possessed a razor-thin fuse, while Linda remained relentless in her need to control every situation. Their explosive romance resembled a ticking time bomb, though no one could have anticipated the catastrophic explosion on the horizon. Despite strict legal prohibitions, Nathaniel had zero intention of abandoning his lethal obsession. He continued acquiring handguns and rifles through black market channels, shady transactions, and legal loopholes. He relished projecting raw power and took immense pride in his expanding arsenal, spending endless hours obsessing over calibers, firing mechanisms, and weapon modifications. What began as a dangerous fixation soon swallowed his entire identity. He carried a loaded handgun even while walking around the house, frequently disassembling and cleaning his weapons right on the kitchen table. He left firearms exposed in plain sight, creating an escalating sense of dread among the household members. Initially, Linda chose not to intervene. As long as Nathaniel brought money home, she turned a blind eye to his illegal security business and asked no probing questions. Over time, however, she realized the problem went far beyond quick cash. Nathaniel's behavior was becoming dangerously unpredictable. He exploded over the slightest slights, a subtle glance, a comment made at the wrong time, or a minor inconvenience. His explosive outbursts would erupt out of nowhere, only for him to suddenly regain his composure seconds later, acting as though nothing had transpired. The first person to voice open concern was Christina, one of Linda's daughters. Christina saw through Nathaniel's facade, recognizing that he wasn't just an unpleasant man, but a dangerous individual capable of horrific acts. She never trusted him, noticing his unsettling fascination with violence and his supreme arrogance. Nathaniel could not tolerate being challenged and demanded the final word in every interaction. What terrified Christina most was how effortlessly his composure could shatter. During one heated disagreement, she watched his knuckles turn white as he clenched his fists in rage, convincing her that it was only a matter of time before he crossed a point of no return. An unsaid dread settled over the household, heavy and undeniable. By 2021, Nathaniel and Linda had been living together for 6 years. On the surface, their life appeared settled, but the foundation of their relationship had thoroughly rotted away. Nathaniel had never been faithful, but his infidelities had now devolved into a routine. He actively sought out new romantic conquests through social media, hopping seamlessly from one affair to the next. Secret conversations became a daily habit as he navigated hidden messaging apps, erased contacts, and masked his digital trail. He meticulously deleted his chat logs, frequently slipping out of the house late at night under the guise of urgent client meetings or pressing personal errands. On countless nights, Linda would wake up in the pitch-black darkness to find his side of the bed empty. He would saunter back home in the early dawn hours, never offering a word of explanation. Nathaniel wasn't remotely afraid of getting caught. He was arrogantly convinced that Linda either wouldn't figure it out or would prove too weak to do anything about it. He believed he held all the cards, but he severely underestimated her. At first, Linda overlooked the subtle shifts in his routine. Over time, however, the pattern became impossible to ignore. The constant absences, the endless texting late into the night, and his sudden, uncharacteristic fixation on his personal appearance. Though the full picture took time to emerge, her suspicions festered. Her patience finally snapped the day a notification flashed across his phone screen, a fleeting text hinting at a recent romantic rendezvous that left zero room for doubt. It confirmed everything she had feared. Yet, Linda didn't blow up. She understood that if Nathaniel was blatantly cheating, it was because he felt utterly invincible. Instead of an immediate, explosive confrontation, she chose a cold, calculated path, gathering irrefutable evidence. She monitored his every move, studied his habits, and read his messages, training herself to spot the exact moments he was lying, covering his tracks, or sneaking off for another clandestine hookup. Linda was not a woman who forgave disloyalty. Her pride and temperament would never allow her to simply accept betrayal or walk away quietly. She had no interest in throwing a hysterical, fruitless scene, but she was equally determined not to let him walk away scot-free. With every fresh piece of evidence, her rage hardened into resolve. She saw two clear paths before her: cut her losses and walk away, or make him deeply regret every choice he had ever made. The longer she weighed her options, the clearer her decision became. She was not going to be just another discarded woman in his wake. Knowing a direct clash with a man as volatile as Nathaniel could easily turn violent, Linda opted for a far more insidious strategy. Rather than engaging in a heated screaming match, she began orchestrating a subtle campaign of revenge designed to make his life unbearable, strip away his illusion of control, and render him completely vulnerable. She didn't have every detail ironed out initially, but one thing was absolute. Her quiet demeanor was merely the calm before a catastrophic storm. After months of meticulous surveillance, Linda executed the first phase of her plot, creating a network of shadow personas. She registered multiple fake profiles across various social platforms, using stock photos of random people and crafting believable online identities. Some accounts portrayed alluring, seductive women. Others mimicked dangerous individuals with shady, criminal backgrounds. She spent endless hours studying online scamming tactics, learning how to manipulate perceptions and engineer convincing lies. Each profile served a specific function in her psychological web, one to entice him, another to play a blackmailer who knew too much, and a third to act as an ominous, anonymous threat. Together, they were designed to wrap Nathaniel in a suffocation of paranoia, convincing him that he was trapped in a deadly game. To make the psychological trap foolproof, Linda dove headfirst into researching the underworld. She studied criminal organizations, intimidation tactics, and the precise language of extortion, immersing herself in how cartels, mobs, and underground networks operated. She analyzed their hierarchies and messaging patterns, learning to replicate their ominous tone. Armed with specialized software and hidden features on social media, she mastered tracking location data and accessing contacts, weaponizing information to turn Nathaniel's own shadow world against him. Before long, Linda had amassed enough dark expertise to make Nathaniel believe her deception was absolute reality. Once every digital piece was set, she executed her plot. Acting under one of her fabricated personas, she made the initial move, adopting the profile of a captivating, mysterious woman who seemed genuinely mesmerized by him. Nathaniel, accustomed to casual online flings, didn't suspect a thing and took the bait immediately. Unlike his usual superficial connections, however, this encounter spiraled into something sinister. After a few days of playful banter, Linda, concealed behind her shadow persona, began dropping eerie hints revealing intimate details about his past. The messages contained just enough unsettling accuracy to make his skin crawl. Then came the psychological masterstroke. She sent him a message displaying his exact, real-time location. It was merely the opening move, but it immediately sent Nathaniel into a tailspin. Linda had claimed her first victory. He was officially terrified, but she was nowhere near finished. The initial scare shook him, yet Linda demanded total psychological destruction. She escalated her campaign, fabricating an entire network of shadow personas. Suddenly, Nathaniel was no longer just chatting with a mysterious woman. He was surrounded by lethal figures, Bulgarian mobsters, relentless cartel enforcers, and cold-blooded hitmen. Each persona brought a distinct backstory, motive, and terrifying set of demands. Messages flooded in from burner numbers and hidden platforms. Some contained direct death threats. Others dangled false promises of protection, while a few presented bizarre, cryptic ultimatums. One text implied his survival hinged on completing seemingly random tasks. Another warned that he was trapped in a sweeping underworld war with zero hope of escape. Nathaniel desperately tried to connect the dots, but the chaotic onslaught shattered his logic. It all felt overwhelmingly real. His behavior shifted overnight. He became a shell of his former self, constantly scanning his surroundings, refusing calls from unknown numbers, and frantically checking his rearview mirror for tailing vehicles. In a stroke of dark irony, he even begged Linda to drive him to various locations to ensure he wasn't being tracked. He scrubbed his message logs, constantly changed passwords, and attempted to throw off imaginary pursuers. Yet every effort only deepened his spiral into severe paranoia. Linda watched with quiet satisfaction as fear slowly devoured his sanity. Her scheme was working brilliantly. Nathaniel's world no longer revolved around his usual vices, but around fighting a phantom enemy. He remained utterly blind to the fact that the true danger was sitting right next to him. Then, in May 2023, a new variable entered the equation: Zur. They met at Nathaniel's new workplace, where she was one of his colleagues. Their initial banter was innocuous enough, but mutual intrigue quickly took hold. Zur was married with 2 children, but her home life was devoid of happiness. She had a history of infidelity, and meeting Nathaniel was simply another thrill to pursue. She believed her personal fulfillment outweighed any moral or societal expectations. Nathaniel was equally indifferent to the consequences. His relationship with Linda had long since turned into a hollow shell, and his fling with Zur provided the adrenaline rush he craved. What began as subtle glances and flirtatious banter rapidly escalated into constant, covert communication. Yet, Linda was tracking his digital footprint every step of the way. The moment Zur appeared in his logs, Linda took notice. Initially, she dismissed it as just another insignificant fling. Soon, however, she realized this situation was far more dangerous. Their messages quickly transcended simple flirting. Nathaniel was declaring his love for Zur, talking about a future together, while Zur echoed the exact same sentiments. They were actively plotting a brand new life. Linda read every single message, her eyes fixed on the screen in absolute disbelief. A wave of profound humiliation washed over her. She had spent months crafting a masterwork of psychological warfare to chain Nathaniel to her, forcing him to live in a nightmare of perpetual terror. Yet, despite her monumental efforts, he was still slipping away, casually falling in love right under her nose, completely oblivious to her intricate trap. This was no longer just simple infidelity. It was an insufferable mockery of her control. Linda realized she could no longer sit idly by in the shadows. It was no longer about keeping him under her thumb. It was about making him bleed. Linda escalated her psychological warfare, unleashing a fresh wave of terrifying, relentless threats. This time, her shadow personas grew even more menacing. The fabricated mob figures explicitly warned Nathaniel that he was treading on thin ice, making it crystal clear that his illicit romance with Zur had to end immediately. Yet, against all odds, Nathaniel didn't break. Months of living in perpetual terror had thoroughly numbed him to fear. Convincing himself that he had already survived the absolute worst, and completely intoxicated by his passion for Zur, he refused to retreat. For the very first time, Nathaniel was no longer just hiding his affair, he was actively fighting to protect it. Realizing that targeting Nathaniel alone would never break him, Linda shifted her strategy towards Zur. Her initial move was to poison the mind of Alberto, Zur's husband. Utilizing her network of burner accounts, she flooded his inbox with cryptic messages implying his wife was unfaithful, attaching damning photos to feed his growing doubts. When subtle suspicion failed to produce dramatic results, Linda ratcheted up the pressure with direct intimidation. Alberto began receiving anonymous threats warning him that his wife and children were in grave danger, explicitly hinting that his loved ones could pay a bloody price. Linda knew that the instinct to protect his family would force Alberto into action. Her psychological poison took hold immediately. Though Alberto tried to ignore the ominous messages at first, the looming dread consumed him. He had no clue who was pulling the strings, but he could feel that this was far bigger than a simple domestic dispute. Linda had achieved her goal. Paranoia reigned inside Zur's household, and terror began dictating their every move. Still, Nathaniel stubbornly clung to Zur, refusing to collapse under the relentless pressure of the fake cartel threats. Seeing his resilience, Linda targeted his final vulnerability, his ability to trust. She confronted him with her knowledge of Zur, but instead of throwing a rage-filled scene, she spun a terrifying new narrative. Zur was not who she claimed to be. Linda convinced him that Zur was actually an operative, working directly for the mafia. Armed with intimate details of their affair, Linda made the absurd lie sound chillingly plausible. She dispatched messages from various fake informants, asserting that Zur always knew far more than she let on, and that her sudden appearance in his life was a calculated setup. Linda meticulously crafted the illusion until Nathaniel had no choice but to buy into the nightmare. The messages claimed his phone was tapped, his every move was being tracked, and Zur was merely using him as an informant for the syndicate. Suddenly, the chaotic pieces of his broken reality clicked together in his mind. To Nathaniel, it all made sense. It explained how the mysterious mobsters knew his exact locations, why he was constantly being followed, and why Zur seemed completely unfazed by the underworld threats. Then came Linda's final trap. Through her criminal personas, she demanded ultimate proof of his loyalty, insisting he show gratitude to the very syndicate that had allegedly saved his life. Slowly, her messages pivoted from vague threats to direct demands regarding how to handle Zur and her family. The mandate was clear. There was no other way out. Exhausted, overwhelmed, and entirely brainwashed, Nathaniel surrendered his remaining sanity. He ceased questioning what was real. Linda had achieved complete victory. He was prepared to do whatever it took. Nathaniel no longer hesitated over what needed to be done. In his warped mind, all fear and regret evaporated, replaced by the fanatical belief that he was executing an inescapable mission. He began plotting the crime with the same cold, methodical focus he had once used to construct his illegal security empire. The first phase was relentless surveillance. He memorized Zur's daily routine, noting precisely when she was home and who accompanied her, while paying special attention to moments when her husband and family were most vulnerable. He scouted the entrances to her residence, mapped out pristine escape routes, and spent days shadowing their every move until every detail was etched into his memory. Simultaneously, he gathered his supplies. Though he already possessed a formidable illegal arsenal, he acquired tactical gear for the job: fresh clothes, heavy gloves, trash bags, heavy-duty tape, and high-powered flashlights. Linda accompanied him on shopping trips, taking meticulous care to remain in the background so no one would suspect her involvement. They discussed every tactical step as if preparing for a high-stakes military operation. Playing the quiet advisor, Linda subtly nudged Nathaniel in the right direction, continually reinforcing the idea that he had to execute the plan flawlessly. She kept him thoroughly convinced that blood was his only path to freedom. By the time every piece of gear was staged, Nathaniel had completely stopped considering the catastrophic consequences. He genuinely believed he was merely carrying out an unavoidable necessity. The die was cast. Now, only execution remained. When the night arrived, the cold plan morphed into a horrific reality. Linda displayed not a single trace of nerves, acting completely oblivious to what was about to unfold. Late that evening, they drove toward Zur's residence with Linda calmly behind the wheel, steering as casually as if running a routine late-night errand. She offered a few token questions about why he needed to go there, but Nathaniel remained stoically silent. He couldn't care less about her queries. His focus was entirely locked onto his target. Upon arrival, Linda remained idling in the car, while Nathaniel stepped out into the dark and approached the house. Knowing the front door would be locked, he slipped into the backyard, shattered a window pane, and slithered inside. The sharp crash of breaking glass instantly awakened Alberto, who climbed out of bed to investigate the intrusion. The moment he appeared, Nathaniel opened fire, but his first shot missed. Realizing this was far more lethal than a simple burglary, Alberto spun around and sprinted down the hallway toward his family's bedroom, desperate to shield them from the killer. Nathaniel gave chase and caught up to him in the narrow corridor. A burst of gunfire echoed through the house, and Alberto collapsed to the floor before ever reaching the bedroom door. The residents briefly fell silent, shattered only by Nathaniel's heavy breathing. Hearing the violent blasts, Zur barricaded herself inside the bedroom with her family, holding them tight while paralyzed by fear over who had breached their home. Nathaniel tried to kick the door open, but it held firm. He leveled his gun directly at the lock and pulled the trigger. The bullet tore through the wood and struck Zur directly, killing her instantly. As the door swung open, a stunned, breathless silence enveloped the room, broken only by a few final, muffled noises. The attack was over in a matter of minutes. Nathaniel surveyed the slaughter. To stage the scene as a robbery gone wrong, he overturned furniture and scattered personal belongings across the floor to simulate a violent struggle. He then casually walked back out to the waiting vehicle. Linda didn't bother asking how it went. She simply put the car in drive, leaving absolute horror in their wake. For a brief moment, a suffocating silence settled over Zur's home, but it didn't last long. Alarmed by the sound of gunshots and shattering glass, frightened neighbors dialed emergency services around 4 a.m. Within minutes, responding officers swarmed the premises. Finding clear signs of forced entry, they moved inward, and the bloody scene left zero doubt. This was no spontaneous act of violence, but an execution. Nathaniel's fatal error was his sloppy attempt to stage a break-in. Investigators immediately noticed that nothing of value had been taken, pointing directly to a targeted assassination rather than a home invasion. The scattered items failed to deceive seasoned detectives, and it didn't take long for law enforcement to connect the crime to someone with a clear motive. By sunrise, detectives were already picking apart Zur's personal life. At her workplace, her affair with Nathaniel was common knowledge among colleagues, who described their connection as far deeper than a fleeting fling, noting they had explicitly discussed a future together. Nathaniel's name instantly rocketed to the top of the suspect list. As detectives pulled his criminal record, they uncovered a long history of violent offenses, illegal activities, and a well-documented obsession with firearms. Every single trail led straight to his doorstep. Yet, while police built their ironclad case, Linda kept playing her dark digital game, messaging Nathaniel through her fake mob personas to reassure him that everything was proceeding according to plan. She fed him the comforting illusion that the syndicate was shielding him, ensuring he believed one thing above all: as long as he followed instructions, he was untouchable. He was convinced that the authorities would never be able to prove his guilt, but the investigation was moving far too fast. Detectives began systematically digging into Nathaniel's recent activity and quickly uncovered glaring inconsistencies. When they analyzed his communication logs, they discovered that over the past few months, he had been flooded with an incredible volume of threats, not from established criminal organizations, but from a web of newly minted, anonymous accounts. This revelation sparked pivotal new questions. If the mafia was truly behind the hit, why did every single shred of physical evidence point exclusively to Nathaniel? Why were there so many miraculous coincidences? What if this elaborate underworld threat wasn't real at all, but rather a carefully staged illusion? These mounting doubts marked the ultimate turning point in the case. For the very first time, investigators began to suspect that there was a far more complex, insidious puppet master pulling the strings behind what initially appeared to be a straightforward gang-related execution. As the investigation reached its climax, Nathaniel finally realized he was running out of time. He could feel the police closing in, making his arrest an absolute inevitability. Blind panic seized him when he noticed he was under active surveillance. He desperately tried convincing himself that his fake mafia protectors would step in to save him, but deep down, the agonizing truth was setting in. Desperate for a lifeline, he turned to his mother. They met in a secluded location away from prying eyes, where he confessed that he was in grave danger, accused of a horrific crime, and needed to vanish immediately. Yet, instead of unconditional support, he met a wall of fear and hesitation. She refused to get involved, fully understanding that aiding his escape meant making herself an accomplice. For a few days, Nathaniel attempted to stay hidden, but surveillance cameras eventually captured him at a local grocery store. He wasn't alone. Linda was right by his side. The moment law enforcement confirmed their precise location, a high-stakes pursuit kicked off. Patrol cars swarmed the surrounding area, but Nathaniel and Linda managed to reach the highway. He was behind the wheel while she sat in the passenger seat, watching the surrounding chaos unfold. The ultimate question now was who was truly in control. Nathaniel believed he was steering his own destiny, but in reality, every second was unfolding according to Linda's grand design. With police cruisers pursuing them for miles, Nathaniel had zero intention of pulling over. He gripped the steering wheel, pushing the accelerator to the floor, weaving recklessly through traffic in a desperate bid for freedom as adrenaline drowned out his fear. Linda sat beside him with an eerie, unbothered calm. She didn't scream, beg him to surrender, or tell him to slow down. She simply watched, as if she already knew precisely how the story ended. They rocketed onto a congested stretch of the highway, where Nathaniel tried to abruptly swerve around a massive truck, only to lose control at breakneck speed. The car skidded violently, slammed into the metal guardrail, and flipped multiple times before crumpling to a halt. When officers approached the twisted wreckage, the interior was eerily silent. Nathaniel was slumped in the driver's seat, a firearm still clutched in his hand, while Linda lay lifeless beside him. In the terrifying final seconds before the impact, he had shot her point blank before turning the weapon on himself. Investigators later meticulously combed the crash scene, trying to comprehend his final motivation. Was it an act of explosive revenge, a final outburst of blind rage, or had he realized in those agonizing last seconds who had actually been orchestrating his descent into hell? Had Linda weaponized her final ride to confess everything, revealing that she was the architect of his paranoia? There were no living answers left. The only two people who held the complete truth were dead. Yet the investigation didn't die with them. Detectives exhaustively analyzed their final movements, phone records, and digital trails. Initially, police presumed Linda was merely a helpless victim, a woman swept up in the wake of a dangerous, violent man. But the deeper investigators dug, the clearer it became that the real narrative was vastly different. The monumental breakthrough came when experts cracked Linda's personal devices. Her laptop and phone contained a staggering archive of chat logs, dozens of active fake accounts, and extensive search histories for advanced surveillance tools, exposing her as the master strategist of the entire tragedy. And social engineering tactics, it didn't take long for forensic experts to piece it all together. Linda had single-handedly orchestrated the entire web of threats, convincing Nathaniel that he was being relentlessly hunted by a shadowy criminal syndicate. Even more damning were her personal chat logs, which revealed how she had meticulously directed his actions, steering him toward an inevitable, blood-soaked conclusion. Login records, IP addresses, and digital message archives all identified her as the master architect behind the entire scheme. She hadn't merely preyed on Nathaniel's deepest fears. She had systematically guided him down a path of total destruction. The recovered files exposed that this insidious manipulation hadn't been a matter of weeks, but an ongoing campaign spanning over a year. This was neither an emotional breakdown nor a spontaneous crime of passion. It was a cold, calculated psychological blueprint. She had studied advanced psychological manipulation, researched digital surveillance techniques, and experimented with various methods to compromise and control another human mind. When the truth finally surfaced, the case assumed a terrifying new dimension. What had initially appeared to be a tragic outburst of jealousy evolved into something far more chilling, a masterclass in psychological warfare where Linda pulled every string. The ultimate irony, however, was that her own deception proved to be her ultimate downfall. She had sought absolute control until the very end, only to become the final victim of the grand illusion she had created. She had driven Nathaniel to commit horrific crimes under the guise of a fabricated reality, only for him to turn the gun on her in those final, chaotic seconds. The case was officially closed, yet haunting questions remained in its wake. Did Nathaniel realize the horrific truth before it was too late? Or did he die still believing he was merely a pawn in a mob war that never even existed? There were no answers left. Only the undeniable reality that the most lethal weapon on Earth isn't a bullet or a blade, but a lie powerful enough to hollow out a person's sanity from the inside. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support truly means the world to me. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please help the channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement makes a massive difference, and I'll see you all next time.